The icy wind of Sydney's early winter chilled me to the bone. I had just left a 3-hour Asian art auction in the Rocks, where the ancient, moss-covered cobblestone streets lay silent under the imposing shadow of the harbor bridge. For the last 3 years, my work as an antiques appraiser had become the only lifeline keeping me from sinking into the mire of the past. I stopped in front of the window of a high-end children's fashion boutique, intending to buy a small gift for my niece back home. However, my feet suddenly became rooted to the spot, as if someone had bolted them to the pavement, and the breath caught in my chest. On the other side of the transparent glass, under the dazzling light of a crystal chandelier, a man was kneeling on the gleaming parquet floor. With care and meticulousness, he was putting tiny leather shoes on a beautiful boy of about 3. Beside him, a young woman with a voluminous mane of curly hair smiled with satisfaction, holding an expensive Birkin bag in her hand. The scene was so beautiful, complete, and happy that it provoked envy. But, in a twist of fate, every feature of the man's face accompanying that woman, the way he frowned slightly while tying the laces, the small mole behind the lobe of his left ear, everything was familiar to a point seared into my memory. It was my husband, whom I had presumed dead in a tragic plane crash 3 years ago, the man for whose soul I had spent a fortune on masses and prayers, the man whose memorial photograph still solemnly presided over my cold house. I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice and then boil with fury, but I did not lunge at them or scream. My instinct as one of the best antiques appraisers whispered to me, "You must keep a cool head. Observe carefully." Before passing judgment on the piece before me, I stepped back, hiding in the shadow of a lamppost, and with trembling hands, I took out my phone. Through the camera screen, zoomed in to the maximum, I clearly saw every gesture of affection he showed the child. The little boy had his same eyes and nose. It was unmistakable. And as for the woman, I recognized her. She was his former secretary, the one about whom Matteo had sworn to me time and time again. "Don't be suspicious, my love. She's just an employee. She has a difficult family situation, and I'm helping her." It turned out the help was so complete that it included having a child together, the cashmere jacket he was wearing, the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, and the bag worth thousands of dollars in his lover's hand. With a piercing pain, I realized that all these luxuries had been bought with my money, with the money from the sale of the dowry my mother had left me, with the money from the sale of the Taino and colonial artifacts my father had so carefully collected, all to settle the 100 million Dominican peso debt he had left behind after his death. I bit my lip so hard it bled to stifle the sob that was fighting its way out of my throat. For 3 years, I had lived like a ghost, caring for his parents as if they were my own, working myself to the bone to pay the debts of a dead man. And he, meanwhile, was living the life of a king in this paradise, with a beautiful woman and a healthy son, building his new home with my sweat and tears. The truth, naked and cruel, was like a sharp knife that plunged into my heart, tearing apart the naive trust I once had. Matteo seemed to feel a fixed gaze upon him. He raised his head, his eyes sweeping the shop window in my direction. I was startled, quickly pulled up the hood of my jacket, and turned away, losing myself in the rushing crowd. I couldn't let him discover me now. I wasn't ready. A scandal in a foreign land would only make me a laughingstock and alert them to hide their assets. I needed a more perfect, more ruthless plan, a plan worthy of the damage they had caused me. I hailed a taxi and with a broken voice said, "To Kingsford Smith International Airport, please." Immediately, sitting in the car, I clutched the still warm phone in my hand. That brief video now weighed as much as 1,000 tons. I watched the city of Sydney recede through the window, fogged by the rain or perhaps by my tears. I no longer knew. I only knew that the weak, love-struck woman named Amelia had died on that street. The one returning now to the Dominican Republic would be a completely different Amelia. The plane tore through the night and ascended into the dark sky, leaving the twinkling lights of Sydney behind. I curled up in my first-class seat. The silence and the gentle aroma of essential oils only fanned the flames of painful memories. I refused the glass of wine offered by the kind flight attendant and asked only for a glass of ice water, so cold it could quell the fire consuming me from within. I remembered the fateful day 3 years ago, the day the news reported the plane crash in international waters. Mateo's name was on the list of missing passengers. I fainted in the living room at home and woke up in a hospital surrounded by my mother-in-law's laments. They found no intact bodies, only some remains of the fuselage and unrecognizable human fragments. The authorities identified Mateo through his dental records and DNA results from a minuscule tissue sample. At that moment, grief clouded my judgment. I could only hug his portrait and cry until I ran out of tears. I had no capacity to question the inconsistencies of that forensic report filled with technical terminology. And after that funeral without a body, my hell began. The creditors arrived at our home like vultures to a carcass. They showed promissory notes with Mateo's signature, totaling 100 million Dominican pesos. They said he had borrowed the money to invest in high-risk projects and had lost everything. My in-laws, Rafael and Milagros, collapsed upon hearing the news. He suffered a stroke that left him bedridden, and she fell into a deep depression, leaving the entire burden on me. Milagros took my hand, her face bathed in tears. "Amelia, my daughter, what a misfortune has befallen us. Mateo is gone and has left us this mountain of debt. Your in-laws are old now. We can only count on you. Do not abandon us. Do not let them foreclose on the family home." Out of loyalty, out of love for my husband, I agreed. I sold all the jewelry my mother had left me in her will. I sold the luxury penthouse my father had given me before the wedding, and most painfully, I had to sell the valuable artifacts my father had collected and cared for his entire life as if they were his own soul. All to buy peace for my husband's family. 100 million pesos. The figure danced in my head, mocking my stupidity. Now, connecting the dots with the image of Mateo's happy family in Australia, everything fit. That money was never lost in bad investments. It was covertly transferred abroad, becoming a villa, luxury cars, the opulent life he and his lover were enjoying. I, Amelia, an expert antiques appraiser, capable of distinguishing the authentic from the fake in ancient objects, had been unable to see the dark soul of the man with whom I shared my bed. I let out a bitter laugh, a distorted grimace reflected on the black screen in front of me. But that was not all. A chilling thought ran down my spine. I remembered the herbal infusion with a pungent smell that Milagros made me drink every night for the past 3 years. She said it was a family recipe for beauty, that she prepared it especially for me to regain my strength. "You have worked too hard for this family, daughter. Drink it to recover." And I drank it with gratitude and emotion. But strangely, since I started drinking that dark liquid, my menstruation became increasingly scarce and irregular. My body was always languid, tired, my skin pale. Although I had no specific illness, I always thought it was due to overwork and worry, but now a terrifying hypothesis formed in my mind. What if that infusion was not to nourish me, but to sterilize me? They wanted to turn me into a workhorse, a money-making machine to support them, but they feared I would remarry, that I would take the remaining assets to another marriage. So, in secret, they destroyed my health, imprisoning me in the cage of loyalty they themselves had built. This cruelty surpassed all human limits. I gripped the glass of water in my hand, my knuckles white from the cold. Misplaced kindness is like a poison. It kills you slowly and painfully. But luckily, I was still alive, and I had awakened. The plane began its descent, preparing to land at Las Americas International Airport in Santo Domingo. Looking at the city lights twinkling like distant stars, I took a deep breath. I was back, but not to continue being the dutiful daughter-in-law or the grieving widow. The taxi screeched to a halt in front of the gate of the stately villa, hidden on a quiet street in Piantini, the place I had called home for 3 years. I took a deep breath, holding back the nausea rising in my throat, preparing to put on the mask of a self-sacrificing and submissive daughter-in-law. As I pushed the door open, the first thing I saw was Milagros lying on the expensive leather sofa with a white facial mask covering her face. She was yelling at the housekeeper in a sharp tone that contrasted with her usual distinguished air. "But how do you do things? I told you to buy fresh shrimp from Sanchez, and you bring me this stuff that looks frozen? Are you trying to poison me?" The housekeeper, cowering in a corner, twisted the edge of her apron, not daring to say a word. Seeing me enter, looking exhausted after the long journey, Milagros bothered to sit up. She glanced at me from the side through her mask with a dismissive voice. "You're back. Why so late? I've told you this house is short-staffed. Your father-in-law is sick. You need to learn to come home early." She didn't ask if the trip had been tiring, nor did she care how the project in Australia had gone. Her first sentence was, as always, an empty reprimand. I put my suitcase on the floor and managed a weak smile, my voice hoarse from containing my emotions. "Yes, the flight was delayed. That's why I'm a little late. How is Papa? Has he been eating and sleeping well these days?" Milagros huffed before answering slowly. "Same as always, a fortune in medicines, and he doesn't get any better. By the way, how was the Australia project? Have you been paid yet? Next month we have to pay your father's hospital bill and the electricity, the water, this useless woman's salary, hundreds of expenses that fall on me." Looking at the woman lying there, I felt a shiver. This was the mother-in-law I once considered my own mother, the one who had hugged me, crying inconsolably upon receiving the news of Mateo's accident, the one who had taken my hand and told me I had to be strong. It turned out it was all a clumsy performance to hide her greedy and selfish nature. In her eyes, I was not her daughter-in-law, not even a family member, but a money-printing machine, a pawn that she and her son could exploit to the core. I swallowed my tears, lowered my head, and replied, "Yes, I know. I'm a little tired. With your permission, I'm going to my room to rest. Tomorrow I'll do the accounts and give the money to Mama." Milagros waved her hand as if shooing away a fly. "Yes, go, and remember to get up early to make breakfast. Don't sleep in until all hours." Silently, I carried my suitcase up the wooden staircase, each step heavy as if I were wearing shackles. The bedroom door closed. I quickly bolted the lock and leaned against it, sliding down to the cold floor. This room, once our love nest, the place that held our sweetest memories, had now become the tomb of my youth. On the opposite wall, our large wedding photo still hung solemnly. Mateo's smile in the photo was so radiant and warm, but looking at it now, it only seemed fake and repulsive. I stood up, walked over to the dressing table, and picked up the photo frame with a picture from our anniversary trip. In the image, he was looking at me with devotion, vowing eternal love. I smiled bitterly, a broken and tragic smile, and slowly placed the photo face down on the table. It was over. The blind love of 10 years, the misplaced loyalty, everything had to end. I took out an old basic mobile phone from the bottom of my suitcase that I had kept as a memento. I inserted a prepaid SIM card I had bought at the airport. My trembling hands dialed the number of Hector, my father's best friend and the family lawyer. The phone rang 3 times before a sleepy but kind voice answered on the other end. "Hello, who is this?" I took a deep breath to calm myself, and my voice came out firm and determined. "Hector, it's Amelia. Forgive me for calling at this hour, but I have something extremely important I need you to do for me immediately." Hector seemed to sense the gravity in my voice. His tone became fully awake. "Amelia, what's wrong?" "Calmly, tell me everything." I looked at the darkness enveloping the room, and every word that came out of my mouth was like a bullet fired into the silent night. "Immediately activate the protection protocol for my inheritance. Completely separate the assets my mother left me and those my father left me from the marital property with Mateo's family, and I need you to secretly investigate the entire file of the plane crash from 3 years ago. I suspect Mateo is still alive." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Hector's voice sounded full of astonishment, but also confidence. "Understood. Don't worry, Amelia. I'm on it right now." The next morning, Santo Domingo awoke to a fine, persistent drizzle, and the biting winter cold seeped into the bones. I left the house at dawn with the excuse of meeting a client to resolve pending matters. My destination was not a luxurious office building, but a small cafe tucked away on a quiet cobblestone street in the Zona Colonial, where Hector used to read the newspaper every morning. Hector was already waiting for me. In front of him, a cup of black, hot, steaming coffee. Seeing me enter, looking haggard with dark circles under my eyes after a sleepless night, he sighed lightly with a compassionate look. He pushed a cup of hot ginger tea towards me. "Drink a little to warm up," he said in his deep, reassuring voice. "If your father saw you like this, his heart would break." I held the cup, and the warmth spreading through my hands comforted me a little. I didn't beat around the bush and got straight to the point. I placed the flash drive with the video I had recorded in Sydney on the table. Hector connected it to his laptop and watched it carefully, second by second. When the video ended, his face hardened, and astonishment gave way to contained anger. He took off his glasses and wiped the steam from them. His voice trembled with rage. "Wretched man! I can't believe he dared to do something so monstrous. He has deceived us all. He has deceived the law." I clenched my hands. My voice was strangely calm, the calm of someone who has hit rock bottom in pain. "I want you to help me recover everything that belongs to me and my family. I don't want a single peso to fall into the hands of those swindlers. Help me file for divorce and report his fraud." Hector nodded with determination and opened his briefcase, taking out a thick folder. He turned the pages, showing me the anomalies he had found the night before after my call. He told me he had asked some old friends in the Dikrim to review the accident case. There were several suspicious points that, overwhelmed by grief at the time, we had overlooked. He pointed to a photocopy with the image of a set of teeth. "This is Mateo's dental record, which was used to match with the body. But look closely. The date of the report has been altered." In reality, this record was redone at a private clinic just 6 months before the accident, and the person who did it was an old schoolmate of Mateo's. I looked at the blurry numbers of the date, and a wave of indignation swept over me. His death was not an accident, but a meticulously orchestrated plan. He had prepared his disappearance perfectly, deceiving the entire world, deceiving the woman he slept with. Hector turned to the DNA analysis page. His voice became more serious. "And this is the DNA result. The tissue sample found at the crash site is a 99% match with your in-laws. Theoretically, it's a confirmation of kinship, but in this case, I suspect there's a loophole. It's very possible that the sample wasn't from Mateo, but from a close relative with the same bloodline. For example, a cousin. I'm investigating if anyone from his family disappeared or died around that time." Every word from Hector was like another nail in the coffin of my marriage. I remembered the months leading up to the accident. Mateo traveled frequently for work, spoke on the phone in secret, and occasionally had inexplicable expenses that he would brush off with evasive answers when I asked. At the time, I thought he was busy with work. Who would have thought he was busy preparing his own death? I looked Hector in the eyes with determination. "Hector, I want to build a legal firewall. Prepare the documents to confirm my separate assets, including my mother's inheritance and the property my father left me. I want them clearly separated, not mixed with the marital property. At the same time, secretly gather evidence of his family's money laundering activities." Hector placed a hand on my shoulder with a look full of confidence. "Don't worry, I'll do it immediately. You've matured and become stronger than your father could have ever imagined. Continue playing your part. Leave the legal side to me. We will dismantle their conspiracy and make them pay for every one of your tears." As I left the cafe, the drizzle had not stopped, but my heart no longer felt cold. I knew I was not alone in this battle. Behind me were Hector, my father's legacy, and the justice that awaited to be served. I turned up my coat collar and blended into the crowd, ready for the next scenes of my performance. Upon returning to the cold house, I began to play my part perfectly. I was no longer the generous daughter-in-law willing to pay for any of my in-laws' absurd expenses. I started complaining about the lack of money, with a perpetually mournful face. That night for dinner, instead of the usual delicacies, I told the housekeeper to prepare some simple dishes, moro de habichuelas and pollo guisado. Milagros sat at the table, frowned at the modest food, and banged her cutlery against the plate. "Are we starving in this house or what? Where is your father's imported ham and the Sanchez shrimp for me? Do you intend for us to die of malnutrition?" I took a bite of bread that tasted bitter in my throat and looked at her with red, teary eyes. "I'm sorry, Mama. Work has been very bad lately. On the Australia project, the client has withheld payment, and the company owes several months' salary to the employees. I had to sell the last of my remaining jewelry to pay the bank interest. Right now, we don't have a single peso left in the house. Please, have a little patience, and eat more modestly. As soon as I get some money, I'll make it up to you." Hearing that there was no money, Milagros's face changed. She didn't believe me, and her gaze scrutinized me from head to toe. "Don't give me stories. How is it possible that the director of a subsidiary of a large group has no money for groceries? Or are you hiding the money to support some lover?" I pretended to be deeply offended, and tears fell onto my plate. "How can you say that, Mama? For this family, I have sold my dowry, my parents' house, everything to pay Mateo's debts. What do I have left to hide? If you don't believe me, look at the pile of foreclosure notices I left on the living room table." I pointed to the stack of fake debt documents I had asked Hector to prepare and had left in plain sight on purpose. Milagros huffed, got up, and went to the living room to look at the papers. The more she read, the paler she became. The figures of debts in the millions of pesos and the threats from collectors made her tremble. She threw the papers on the table and turned to me with a look of panic and contempt. "How is it possible we owe so much? What have you done?" I covered my face and wept inconsolably. "I don't know. The interest is accumulating. Now they're threatening to foreclose on the house, the furniture. I don't know how we're going to survive next month." Milagros said nothing more. She silently went up to her room, leaving her dinner half finished. I knew that the fear of poverty and losing everything was beginning to gnaw at her. In the following days, I cut all luxury expenses. No more expensive medicines, beauty treatments, and I even insisted on saving on the electricity bill. Milagros was on edge. She was afraid of having to support me, a useless daughter-in-law, and losing the source of income she had had for so long. Through a hidden camera in the living room, I saw Milagros start to act secretly. Taking advantage of my absence, she snuck into the study where the valuable artifacts my father had left me were kept. She caressed each ceramic vase, each bronze statuette with greedy eyes. Then she took out her phone and called someone, whispering, "Hello, is that you? I have some artifacts I want to sell urgently. They are authentic, the good stuff. If you can come see them and give me a good price, you can take them. I need the money now." I was sitting in my car, parked at a distance, listening to every word, every gesture through my phone screen. I felt a pang in my heart seeing her dirty hands touch my father's sacred memories. These were objects my father had spent a lifetime collecting, which he treasured as if they were his life. And now this greedy woman was haggling over them as if they were vegetables at the market. I gripped the steering wheel, my nails digging into my skin. To catch the tiger, you have to enter its lair. To unmask these people, you have to let their bottomless greed manifest. I managed a cold smile, a cruel smile that had never appeared on my face before. "Sell it all. Sell it. Every object you sell will be a sentence, irrefutable proof to send you and your entire family to jail. I'll let you dig your own grave without me having to lift a finger." That night, a downpour began. The patter of rain on the roof was like the cry of my soul. At 10 o'clock, as was customary for the past 3 years, Milagros came up to my room with a cup of steaming infusion. The strong smell of herbs turned my stomach, but I maintained a serene expression. She placed the cup on the nightstand with a falsely sweet voice. "Amelia, drink the infusion. I just made it. Drink it while it's hot so it works. You've been so thin lately. You need to nourish yourself to have strength for work." Seeing her kind smile, I felt a deep disgust. I took the cup, feeling the warmth, and replied in a low voice, "Thank you, Mama. Just leave it there. I'll drink it when it cools down a bit." Milagros stayed a moment longer, her restless eyes scanning the room as if looking for something before adding, "Remember to drink it all, okay? These herbs are very valuable. I had to order them from a village in the mountains of Constanza." I waited for her to leave and close the door. I immediately got up and poured the contents of the cup into a glass jar I had prepared, carefully wiping the rim to leave no trace. The next morning, I took the jar to Dr. Serrano, an old friend of my father's and a reputable expert in natural medicine. In his office, permeated with the scent of herbs, Dr. Serrano took the jar, sniffed it, tasted a drop, and frowned. He took a sample of the dregs and examined it under a microscope. His expression became increasingly grave. He took off his glasses and looked at me with compassion and concern. "Amelia, how long have you been drinking this?" I replied with a trembling voice. Every night for 3 years. My mother-in-law says it's an infusion for beauty and relaxation. Dr. Serrano shook his head and sighed with regret. Beauty. What beauty is this going to give you, child? This is an ancient, extremely toxic formula that was used in royal courts to sterilize women. Its main component, combined with other extremely cold-natured herbs, is not harmful in small doses, but taken continuously as you have, it causes ovarian atrophy, severe hormonal disorders, and ultimately, permanent secondary infertility. My ears rang. The floor seemed to sink beneath my feet. Permanent infertility. Had they dared to do that to me? I clung to the edge of the table to keep from falling, and tears flowed uncontrollably. I remembered the nights I dreamed of being a mother, of cradling a baby in my arms. I remembered the times I had gone to church to pray, kneeling for hours, asking for a child. It turned out that all my hopes had been murdered at their source by the very people I called family. Dr. Serrano continued, his voice trembling with indignation. And that's not all, Amelia. This formula also has side effects, such as general weakening of the body, causing a constant state of fatigue and apathy, nullifying the will to resist. They wanted to turn you into an automaton, an obedient money-making machine, without the ability to have children to tie you to them for life. The truth was so raw and brutal that I couldn't articulate a word. I had dedicated my youth, my love, and my respect to them. And what did I receive in return? A vile betrayal, a ruthless conspiracy to ruin my life. They not only wanted my money, they wanted to take away my right to be a mother. They wanted to lock me forever in this gilded cage of lies. I wiped my tears and stood up straight. The deepest pain had transformed into a fire of hatred that burned fiercely in my heart. I looked at Dr. Serrano, my voice as cold as ice. Dr. Serrano, thank you. Please keep this a secret. I need you to write me an official report with your seal, analyzing the components of this infusion. I will use it to demand justice. As I left the clinic, the rain had stopped, and the sun was shining brightly. I looked up at the blue sky and silently promised my father, my unborn child, that I would cry no more. My tears were too precious to be shed for those beasts. From this moment on, the good and submissive Amelia was dead. All that remained was a relentless Amelia, ready to tear everything down to make the guilty pay with their own blood and tears. This poisonous infusion, I would make them drink it, drop by drop. 2 days after discovering the truth about the infusion, I received a call from Hector. He summoned me to his office, where he was waiting for me with a thick audit dossier on my in-laws' financial situation. Hector's office smelled of old paper, and the ticking of a pendulum clock marked the rhythm of a time bomb. Hector placed the dossier on the table and slid it towards me. His face was a mixture of seriousness and contempt. Amelia, you have to prepare yourself. What you are about to see is not just sentimental deceit, it's an entire economic crime scheme disguised as an honorable family. With trembling hands, I opened the first page. What I saw was a statement of my in-laws' bank accounts for the last 3 years. The figures were dizzying. My in-laws, who always complained of being sick and living off my charity, were handling cash flows of tens of thousands of dollars. Hector pointed to the incoming transfers and explained, "Look, every month their accounts received large sums of money from shell companies abroad. The description was always charitable donation or medical aid, but in reality, it's money from the front companies Mateo created to launder dirty money." I looked at the names of the companies in English and felt a tightness in my chest. While I was working myself to the bone, selling my assets to pay my husband's debts, they were sitting on a mountain of dirty money. They played the part of helpless old people, squeezing every last peso from my sweat while helping their son divert funds abroad. Hector turned to the next page. His voice became more serious. And this is the most terrifying part. Most of this money, after passing through several intermediary accounts, ended up in a secret trust fund in Switzerland called the Dante Trust. I've asked some contacts to investigate it. The beneficiaries of that fund are none other than Mateo and his son. I dropped the dossier, and a shiver ran down my spine. Dante, surely named after his son, had calculated everything. He used his parents as a cover and his wife as a tool to make money and divert attention, all to build a financial empire for his new family. His cruelty and calculation surpassed the limits of what is human. I looked up at Hector, my gaze hard, without a single tear. "Hector, is this evidence sufficient to charge them with money laundering?" Hector nodded firmly. "More than enough, but we need a little more time to consolidate the case, to make sure that when we strike, they have no escape. Sign this power of attorney, and I will work discreetly with the Economic Crimes Unit." I took the pen and signed, my stroke firm as if cutting all remaining emotional ties. I didn't just want a divorce. I wanted them to pay before the law for the dirty money they had amassed on my pain. As I left the office, I told myself, "Matteo, you love money so much? Well, I will use your own greed to send you to prison." To carry out my plan and lure the snake out of its hole, I needed the perfect bait. I drove out of the noisy city towards the quiet outskirts, where a country house with a red roof was hidden under ancient trees. It was the refuge of Maestro Joaquin, my first mentor, the man who taught me to see the soul of antiques and the best restorer of pre-Columbian pottery in the Dominican Republic. Entering the moss-covered brick courtyard, the smell of fired clay mixed with the aroma of tea calmed me a little. Maestro Joaquin was sitting at a stone table, delicately holding an old taino pot, his white hair blowing in the wind. Seeing me, he squinted and smiled kindly. "Amelia, my child, it's been a long time since I've seen you here. Come in, have some hot tea." I sat across from him, my heart in a knot. I didn't dare look him in the eye, fearing his piercing gaze would uncover the murky scheme I was plotting. After a few minutes of trivial conversation, I gathered my courage and told him the whole story. "Matteo, the betrayal, my in-laws' plan to rob me." Maestro Joaquin listened in silence, his bony hands gripping the teacup. When I got to the part about the poisonous infusion and the dirty money, his eyes flashed with an unusual fury. He set the cup down hard on the table. His voice trembled with emotion. "How can there be such heartless people in the world? Your father was an upright man his whole life, and look at the kind of son-in-law he got. A beast." I lowered my head, my voice choked. "Maestro, I came today to ask you a favor. I know it goes against your professional principles, but I truly have no other choice." Maestro Joaquin looked at me sternly. "What do you want me to do? Don't tell me you want me to make a fake to deceive someone. In my life, I have only restored to save the beauty of the past. I have never been an accomplice to deceit." I knelt before him, tears rolling down my cheeks. "I beg you, Maestro, it's not for personal gain. It's to unmask a much greater deception. I need a perfect sunstone vessel, a one-of-a-kind taino artifact, one that can deceive the most expert eyes to lure Matteo out of his lair. He is so greedy that only a treasure of that magnitude will make him fall into the trap." Maestro Joaquin fell silent, looking into the distance. The internal struggle was reflected on his wrinkled face. He was a man of honor who hated fraud, but he also loved me like a daughter. After a long while, he sighed. "Get up, Amelia. I understand your pain. I will help you. Not to break my principles, but to teach that wretch a lesson in your father's name. But recreating the legendary sunstone vessel, the sunshine after the storm, will not be easy." I wiped my tears, my eyes shining with hope. I knew that if he accepted, my plan was already half successful. I looked at him firmly. "I know it's difficult, but I trust your golden hands, and I've brought the most important thing for you to create this masterpiece." With trembling hands, I opened a small brocade box I took from my bag and placed it on the stone table. Inside, on a bed of red velvet, rested a fragment of ceramic the size of my palm, emitting a soft, fascinating golden light. It was the iridescent, deep color, with delicate motifs that seemed to dance on the pearlescent glaze. As soon as Maestro Joaquin saw the fragment, his eyes widened. His trembling hands reached for it but stopped, as if he feared it would vanish upon touch. He whispered, his voice broken with astonishment. "My God, this is authentic sunstone pottery, the legendary metallic reflection of the Taino masters. I thought in my lifetime I would only see it in books." I nodded slightly, with immense pain. Yes, Maestro, it's the only authentic fragment my mother left me. She said it was part of a vessel from a cacique's sacred cave that our ancestors preserved for generations. It is the soul of our family. Maestro Joaquin put on a magnifying glass and examined every detail, every reflection, marveling. For a man who had dedicated his life to ceramics, this fragment was more valuable than gold. It was the key to unlocking the secrets of a technique lost for centuries. He looked up, his eyes full of regret. Amelia, do you know the value of this? This fragment alone could buy a fortune. What are you planning to do with it? I took a deep breath, my voice firm. I want you to pulverize it. What? Maestro Joaquin was stunned, almost dropping his glasses. Are you crazy? To destroy a national treasure to make a fake? I looked him in the eye, holding back tears. I'm not crazy. I know what it's worth. But if I keep it, it will remain just a fragment in a box. However, if we use it to create a complete vessel, even if it's fake, it will become the weapon that brings me justice. I need the original ceramic paste, the original glaze to deceive Mateo and his experts. Only by sacrificing this fragment can I catch that greedy wolf. Silence filled the room. The maestro looked at the fragment and then at me. Understanding the pain and determination in my eyes, he knew that for me, at that moment, nothing was more important than avenging my father and myself. Finally, he nodded. He caressed the fragment one last time, like a farewell. All right, I will help you. I will use the material from this fragment and my secret techniques to resurrect this vessel. It will be a masterpiece as real as life itself, the sweetest and deadliest trap. I watched him take the fragment to the workshop and felt a knot in my stomach, as if my skin were being torn. Mama, I'm sorry. I have to destroy your memory to protect the family's honor. Please, from heaven, help me so that this sacrifice is not in vain. That fragment of destiny now had a new mission, that of justice and punishment. In the following days, I delved deeper into my role as a desperate daughter-in-law. I announced that I was suspending my father-in-law's expensive medical treatment, replacing it with generic drugs covered by public health insurance. I fired the housekeeper, claiming I couldn't afford her, and took on the household chores myself, clumsily and listlessly. The house, already somber, became even colder and more suffocating. Milagros was like a cornered beast. The false poverty I had created fueled her greed and fear. Through the security camera connected to my phone, I watched her act one afternoon. While I pretended to be out borrowing money, Milagros slipped into the study, where some artifacts I had deliberately not sold still remained. She looked around with cunning eyes, approached a fine wooden shelf, and picked up a Talavera ceramic jar from the 18th century. My father's favorite, I murmured to myself. Her voice was clearly audible through the microphone, full of resentment and greed. This stingy brat, complaining about a few pesos. I'll sell these things and send the money to my Mateo so he can sort out his affairs. What can you expect from her? What belonged to her father also belongs to her husband's family. I have every right to sell it. With trembling hands, she wrapped the jar in newspaper and put it in a large travel bag. She acted like an amateur thief, but the cruelty of her thoughts was professional. She felt not the slightest remorse for stealing the assets of her deceased father-in-law to benefit her son. I, sitting in a nearby cafe with my headphones on, felt each of her words like needles in my heart. What belonged to her father also belongs to her husband's family. How could she say something so absurd and shameless? My father had treasured each piece, and now they were falling into the hands of a vulgar person, sold at a bargain price. Milagros left with the heavy bag through the back door, where a rough-looking man was waiting for her. The man examined the jar and smiled disdainfully. "It's authentic, ma'am, but with the crisis, I can only give you 25,000 pesos. If you agree, take the money. If not, I'm leaving." 25,000? But my son said this was worth hundreds of thousands. Milagros haggled, but her eyes were fixed on the wad of bills the man was holding. "All right, 25,000. Give me the money quickly before my daughter-in-law comes back." She took the money, counted it hastily, and put it in her pocket, beaming. I watched the scene on the screen, and a cold smile formed on my lips. She didn't know that the jar was a restoration I had commissioned from Maestro Joaquin. In its base was a tiny location chip, and most importantly, the entire illegal transaction had been recorded as irrefutable proof. Milagros, enjoy your 25,000 pesos. They will be your one-way ticket to a place reserved for the greedy and the immoral. When I had the sunstone vessel in my hands, perfectly recreated by Maestro Joaquin, I knew it was time to cast the final net. I locked myself in the study and opened my laptop to make a video call to London. I needed to speak with Arthur, an influential art dealer with whom my father had done business in the past. Arthur was a man with an expert eye, but who loved money more than art. His greed would make him my best pawn. Arthur's gaunt face, with his blue eyes, appeared on the screen. He seemed surprised. I got straight to the point. With an air of mystery and caution, I told him I possessed a treasure the whole world coveted, a sunstone vessel from the Taino chiefdom era, in perfect condition. Arthur laughed, his skeptical laugh sounding through the speakers. "My dear Amelia, are you joking? Pieces of that quality can be counted on one hand, and most are in national museums. How could you possibly have something like that?" I offered no explanation. I simply brought the vessel close to the camera, rotating it slowly under a special light. The golden and coppery sheen reflected softly. The delicate glyphs seemed to come to life. Arthur's smile vanished. He brought his face closer to the screen, his eyes wide. "My God, that sheen, that ceramic paste, it's impossible. It's too perfect." I pulled the vessel away, my voice calm but firm. "It's a family heirloom from an important Dominican lineage. They want to sell it to save their business from bankruptcy. But the owner has one condition. It will only be sold to someone of Dominican descent, someone who truly values and wants to repatriate this national treasure." Arthur swallowed hard. He knew the enormous commission he could get. He nodded repeatedly. "Understood. I will spread the word in the most exclusive circles where the billionaires move. Trust me. In a few days, the entire black market will be buzzing about this." I turned off the computer and leaned back in my chair. The news of the legendary vessel would spread like wildfire in the world of art smuggling and money laundering. The world Mateo longed to enter. He had always boasted of being an expert. Hearing about such a treasure, with the condition of, for Dominicans only, his greed and arrogance would soar. Outside, the winter wind blew hard. I was weaving an invisible web with the threads of greed, lies, and my father's sacred memories. I didn't know if I was going too far, but every time I remembered Milagros's shameless gaze, the poisonous infusion, I felt I had no other choice. I stood up and approached my father's portrait. I lit a stick of incense. "Dad, forgive me for dragging your noble passions into this mire, but to pull out the weeds, sometimes you have to get your hands dirty. The big fish is about to bite the hook, Dad, and I will be the one to pull the line, even if I have to bring down the sky." Exactly 1 week after my call with Arthur, I received a new message in my encrypted email. Arthur was euphoric. The news of the vessel had caused an earthquake in the clandestine collecting world. He had received offers from all over the world, but one client in particular had caught his attention. He called himself Señor C., a mysterious Dominican businessman based in Switzerland. He not only offered an astronomical initial sum, but also demonstrated a surprisingly detailed knowledge of the vessel's history and characteristics. He claimed to have heard about it from a deceased mentor, and that owning it was his life's dream, a tribute to his memory. Reading those words, I let out a bitter laugh, tears welling in my eyes. Señor C? For Cabron? It didn't matter. The way he spoke of his deceased mentor disgusted me. He dared to use my father, the father-in-law he had betrayed, as an excuse for his false devotion. Arthur added, "This client is very determined. He says he wants to buy it not just as a collector, but as a gift for his son's 3rd birthday, as a family heirloom. He wants to use it to launder a large sum of money and solidify his status in European high society." I gripped the mouse so tightly my knuckles turned white. A gift for his 3-year-old son, the illegitimate son he had with his mistress. While I was waiting for news from him, he wanted to use dirty money, a treasure he believed to be authentic, to build a brilliant future for that child. Upon the ruins of my happiness, the audacity of this man knew no bounds. I replied to Arthur, demanding that Senor C prove his financial solvency before proceeding. Tell him the owner of the vessel is very demanding. She doesn't need a deposit. She needs to see his power. Ask him to send a list of assets or artifacts of equivalent value that he owns as collateral. After sending the email, I remained silent. In the darkness, I was playing a game of poker with my own husband. He in the light as a mysterious billionaire. I, in the shadows, as a desperate seller. He thought he was the hunter, not knowing he was running straight into the trap of his prey. Mateo, you are smart, calculating, but you forgot something fundamental. The one who knows the prey best is the hunter who raised it. The knowledge of antiques with which you impress the world? My father and I taught it to you. Little by little, you use our weapons against us, and today I will use your own arrogance to finish you. 3 days later, Arthur forwarded me a password-protected PDF, accompanied by a note of astonishment. Amelia, you have to see this. This Senor C's fortune is incredible. He owns pieces that even the British Museum would envy. With trembling hands, I entered the password, a bad feeling growing inside me. The file opened, revealing a long list of antiques with detailed photos and certificates of ownership. On the first page, the image of a Ming Dynasty chicken cup, vibrant and colorful, made me cover my mouth to stifle a sob. It was my father's favorite piece. He used to contemplate it when he was happy and always warned me to be careful when cleaning it. He said it symbolized family unity, and now it was on the asset list of the man who had shattered my family. I kept scrolling, tears blurring my vision. A Qing Dynasty goose egg vase, a scroll of the 7 sages of the bamboo grove, a pair of 100 birds pay homage to the phoenix vases taller than a person. Everything were treasures from my father's collection. 3 years ago, before my father's death and Mateo's accident, they were safe in the family's vault. I remembered that at that time, Mateo often offered to go down to the vault to check and maintain the artifacts. He said he wanted to learn, to share the burden with his father-in-law. My father trusted him blindly, gave him the key. It turned out that during those checks, he had been replacing the authentic pieces with high-quality fakes and smuggling the originals out of the country. I looked at the list. Each object seemed to scream, denouncing the heinous crime of that ungrateful son-in-law. He had not only stolen the inheritance, he had stolen the soul, the memories of my family. He was using these sacred objects as collateral, as a springboard for his dirty career, to flaunt his wealth. Anger erupted in me like a volcano. I slammed the table hard. "Mateo, you are a beast!" I screamed into the empty room. I remembered my father on his deathbed, his clouded eyes still worried about preserving the legacy for his descendants. He didn't know that his son-in-law, whom he loved like a son, had already stolen everything. That betrayal was more painful than death. I wiped my tears. My gaze turned cold as steel. This list was the definitive proof the noose Mateo had placed around his own neck. He thought that by flaunting his assets, he would win the seller's trust, not knowing that the seller was the true owner of those objects. I saved the file, made several copies. It would be the most damning indictment on Judgment Day. I promised my father in silence, I will recover everything, down to the last piece. These treasures must return to where they belong, not to the hands of a swindler, a traitor like him. With the humiliating list in my possession, I began to communicate directly via email with Senor C, bypassing Arthur. I created an anonymous email address, Guardian of Memory, and began a tense psychological duel. I knew Mateo was distrustful, arrogant, and always wanted to appear as an expert, so I attacked that weakness. Mateo's first email was full of presumption and probing. "Dear Madam, I am very impressed with the vessel. However, there are many fakes in Taino pottery. I need more technical details. Does your vessel have the glaze drip at the base? And what is the exact thickness of the wall?" Reading his questions, I smiled bitterly. Glaze drip. It was a term I had made up one afternoon, joking while teaching him to distinguish pottery. I told him that quality pieces often had accumulations of glaze at the base. It was an anecdote between us, not in any book. And now he was using that amateur knowledge to test me. I drafted my response with a humble tone but with the sharpness of an expert. Dear Señor C., you are a great connoisseur. My vessel indeed presents that drip you mention, a sign of the highest quality pieces. Additionally, at the base, it has a discreet crescent-shaped incision, which according to legend was the private signature of the craftsman for the cacique's favorite wife. The crescent-shaped incision was a completely fabricated detail that Maestro Joaquin and I had added on purpose. I wanted to create a unique feature, a sweet trap to reinforce his blind faith. If he were a true expert, he would doubt it, but Mateo was an amateur with fragmented knowledge, blinded by greed. And as I expected, a few hours later he replied, euphoric, fantastic, the crescent moon. I remember reading about it in some ancient text. It must be authentic. Name your price. I will buy it, whatever the cost. I want it. He had fallen for it. He believed the false detail because it satisfied his ego and his imagination. He thought he had found a unique piece, an undiscovered treasure. His overconfidence had killed his caution. I didn't reply immediately. I let him wait, letting his desire intensify. In negotiation, silence is also a weapon. I imagined him pacing in his luxurious apartment in Switzerland, constantly checking his email, fearing the piece would fall into other hands. The feeling of having him in my power, of controlling his emotions from a distance, gave me a strange satisfaction. Before, I was always the one waiting. Now, I was the one pulling the strings. It was late. I closed the laptop. My reflection in the dark screen showed a thinner face, with deep but fiery eyes. I was no longer the naive wife. Betrayal had forged me into a warrior. Mateo, enjoy your last moments of euphoria, because your nightmare has just begun. Just as I predicted, the big fish could not resist the bait. After confirming the fake detail of the crescent moon, Mateo lost all caution. He accepted the astronomical price I proposed, a figure that could buy an entire building in the center of Santo Domingo. But his ambition didn't stop there. He wanted to use the purchase to launder the enormous capital he had accumulated. However, to gather the cash the seller demanded, he had to move quickly. Through the financial reports Hector obtained from the shadow banking system, I saw how he began to sell his stocks at a loss, mortgage his villa in Switzerland, and borrow from loan sharks. He was a desperate gambler, betting everything on one last card, convinced he would win. But what hurt me most was seeing him extend his greedy tentacles to his homeland, snatching his own parents' last refuge. One morning, listening through the listening device on Milagros's phone, I heard her speak in a trembling, tearful voice. Mateo, son, are you sure? The house in the village is where we have revered our ancestors for generations. If we sell it, what will we tell the family? And when we are old, where will we go? Mateo's voice sounded cold and cruel. Mama, don't be sentimental. What do you want that rundown house for? I need the money now for a big deal. When I close it, I'll bring you to Switzerland to live like kings. Sell it quickly. They're offering me a good price. Don't let it slip away. But your father is sick, Milagros protested weakly. Then we'll treat him here. The medicine here is the best. Mama, if you love me and your grandson, do it now. You don't want little Dante to suffer like I did, do you? Hearing Dante's name, Milagros seemed hypnotized. She wiped her tears, and her voice became firm. All right, I'll sell it. Anything for my grandson's future. I took off the headphones and threw them on the table, furious. For him, the tomb of his ancestors, his birthplace, his parents' refuge in their old age, were all commodities. He painted them a paradise to deceive them and leave them homeless. A few days later, through the camera, I saw Milagros sign the sale of the house. Her hands were trembling, but her eyes shone as she saw the down payment. She murmured, "May the ancestors bless my grandson so that he does well. When he is rich, he will build a larger temple for you." She didn't know that the money would never reach her grandson and that the Swiss dream was an illusion. When Mateo fell, they would lose the house and have nowhere to go. Their blind devotion and greed had made them accomplices in their own ruin. I watched it all with a mixture of pity and bitter satisfaction. They had brought their own misfortune upon themselves. After gathering the money, Mateo proposed to conduct the transaction at a maximum security bank in Zurich. He cited security, but I knew he wanted to avoid bringing a large sum of money to the Dominican Republic and keep the piece abroad for easy resale. I couldn't allow it. My goal was to lure him to the Dominican Republic to face justice. Here, I adopted the role of a seller with a strong sense of nationalism, somewhat old-fashioned and eccentric. I replied with a proud and firm tone, "Dear sir, I am afraid you have misunderstood my wishes. This vessel is not a mere commodity, it is the soul of our nation, the legacy of our ancestors. It has been away for too long. I want it to return and remain in its homeland." I paused and continued, "My principle is non-negotiable. The transaction must take place in the Dominican Republic, at my residence, so that I can pay my respects to my ancestors before handing it over. If you cannot meet this condition, I will cancel the sale and look for a buyer with more sensitivity." I sent the email and waited nervously. I was betting on his greed and arrogance. For someone so desperate to own the piece, a rejection for such an absurd reason would infuriate him, but also stimulate him. Besides, he thought he was so smart that he wouldn't think an old-fashioned seller like me could be a danger. And indeed, 2 days later he replied. He changed his tone, showing respect for my patriotism. "You are absolutely right, madam. The roots call. I greatly appreciate your sentiment. I agree to do the transaction in the Dominican Republic. I will fly as soon as possible. I hope you will keep your word." Reading his false words, I felt nauseous. The man who had sold his conscience and his family was now using patriotic discourse to deceive me. I suppressed my disgust and smiled coldly. He had taken the bait. He didn't know that the airport in Santo Domingo was not a red carpet for a hero, but the gate of death awaiting him. I had prepared a perfect trap for him in the very house where he had betrayed me. He would enter with the pride of a winner, only to discover he was a pawn on my board. I called Hector. "He's taken the bait. He's agreed to come. Prepare everything. There can be no mistakes." Hector replied, euphoric. "Perfect. I've spoken with the police. As soon as he sets foot in the airport and carries out the transaction, we'll close the net." The game was coming to an end. "Mateo, enjoy your last days of freedom. The homeland you use as an excuse will be your eternal prison." Despite having agreed to come to the Dominican Republic, Mateo's suspicious nature made him pose one last demand. He asked for a carbon-14 dating certificate and a spectrographic analysis of the ceramic paste from a prestigious institute. He thought this was the final filter. If the piece passed this scientific test, it was 100% authentic. I read his email unfazed. Maestro Joaquin and I had already anticipated this move. I took the original fragment, the one I had sacrificed, to the Institute of Cultural Heritage. Dr. Hidalgo, another old friend of my father's, received me. I placed the fragment on the table and said sincerely, "Doctor, I need your help. I need a dating and composition analysis for this fragment, but on the certificate, please list the sample as Taino Sunstone Vessel, private collection, not fragment. I swear I am not doing this for profit, but to bring to justice someone who has plundered our national heritage." Dr. Hidalgo took the fragment, moved by its beauty. He knew of my family's tragedy. After a long silence, he nodded firmly. "All right. I trust you as I trusted your father. Science is at the service of truth, and sometimes to protect it, one must be flexible. I will do it." 3 days later, I received the certificate with the Institute's official seal. The analysis confirmed that the sample dated back to the 15th century and that the composition of the clay and glaze matched samples from Taino kilns. It was a certificate more real than reality itself, a death sentence for Mateo's greed. I scanned the certificate and sent it to him. I could imagine his triumphant face on the other side of the screen. He believed in science, in numbers, but he forgot that the human being is the most unpredictable variable. He couldn't imagine that the analyzed sample was real, but the object he was about to buy was fake. Upon receiving the certificate, Mateo felt invincible. He replied instantly, "Excellent. I have no more doubts. I have booked a flight. I will be in Santo Domingo this Saturday. Have everything ready. My money is ready." I read the message with a cold smile. This certificate not only proved the antiquity of the fragment but also Mateo's stupidity and his tragic end. He himself had signed his sentence by blindly trusting what he saw, not knowing that behind that apparent truth lay an abyss of deception. The death certificate, I thought. It would take him to the peak of hope, only to throw him into the hell of despair. Matteo, you like the truth? I will show it to you, but a truth so bitter you'll never want to swallow it. As the day of Matteo's return approached, the tension grew, but it was the hunter's tension before the shot. Across the ocean, Matteo was taking the final steps of his life's gamble. To raise the enormous sum of cash, he not only sold his assets and took out loans, but did something terrible. He sold off the authentic artifacts he had stolen from my family at a loss. He contacted notorious art traffickers on the European black market. Through the information network Hector had established with Interpol's help, we followed his every move. He sold the Ming chicken cup to a Macau kingpin for a fraction of its real value. He sold the pair of vases to an anonymous collector in the Middle East. Every time I received a report, my heart sank. It was my father's legacy, my family's soul, being dismembered and sold off, but I had to endure. Every transaction, every invoice, every call was recorded as irrefutable proof of his crimes of smuggling and money laundering. Hector called me, his voice urgent but excited. Amelia, he just closed the last sale. He has raised the money and transferred it to an intermediary account in Hong Kong, ready to bring it to the Dominican Republic. Interpol has the list of buyers and all the evidence. His criminal file is now as thick as a dictionary. I clutched the phone. Thank you, Hector. He has no escape now. That's right, Hector continued. When he lands at Las Americas, he'll think he's a king. He doesn't know that a shiny pair of handcuffs is waiting to welcome him. I hung up and looked at my father's portrait. Dad, I have almost recovered your honor. Those who stained our family's name will pay 100,000 times over. Matteo packed his bags with jubilation, dreaming of the legendary vessel that would change his life. He thought he was the winner, but he didn't know he had lost the game from the beginning. He gambled with greed and betrayal, and the price could only be destruction. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was no longer that of a haggard and sad woman, but that of someone cold and distant, forged in the storm. The afternoon before Matteo's return, I went to the market. I bought a large bouquet of white roses, the ones he used to say symbolized pure love. I placed them in a crystal vase in the center of the dining table. I went down to the cellar and took out a bottle of Vega Sicilia from 1982, the wine my father had saved for the birth of his first grandchild. That night's dinner was suspiciously opulent. On the table, my in-laws' favorite dishes, puerco asado and puya, fresh seafood. The aroma filled the house, but did not dispel the chill that crept into every corner. My in-laws looked at the table, stunned. Milagros asked, "What's the occasion for this feast? The other day you said you didn't even have money for bread." I smiled and served her wine, its deep red color like blood. "Eat, Mama. I've thought about it. The hard days are about to end. Tomorrow everything will be over, and our family will start a new chapter. I wanted to offer you a nice dinner to say goodbye to the old times." Hearing the hard days are about to end, Milagros's eyes lit up. She probably thought I had gotten money or that Matteo was about to arrive to save them. She picked up her cutlery enthusiastically. I knew it. My daughter-in-law is very capable. When Matteo returns, together you can handle anything. Eat, Raphael. Eat and build up your strength to enjoy what's coming. My father-in-law, in his wheelchair, made some unintelligible sounds, but his eyes also gleamed with greed at the sight of the wine. I watched them eat voraciously. They filled me with pity and disgust. They were feasting on my sweat, on my father's sacrifice, on their own betrayal. I raised my glass. Through the crystal, their figures looked distorted. They were not parents. They were leeches. I took a sip, the bitterness running down my throat. I set the glass down on the table, the sharp sound breaking the false joy. I looked Milagros in the eye. My voice soft but sharp. "Is the dinner good, Mama? Enjoy it and remember it well, because it may be the last family dinner I prepare for you." Milagros froze, a piece of roasted pork half chewed. She looked at me, her instinct telling her something was wrong. She swallowed hastily. "What do you mean?" The last dinner. Are you going somewhere? I didn't answer, just smiled. A smile that chilled her. Outside, the wind picked up, announcing the storm that was about to break. The atmosphere grew heavy. Slowly, I took a thick envelope from my bag and slid it across the table towards Milagros. She looked at it, her hands trembling as if it contained a monster. "Open it, Mama. It's a gift." She pleaded with her eyes, but I insisted. With clumsy fingers, she tore the envelope. A pile of photos fell onto the table. They were photos of Mateo smiling radiantly next to Yaritza and their son abroad. Photos of them shopping, of Mateo kneeling to put shoes on his son, sharp images of a happy family. A family where I did not exist. The blood drained from Milagros's face. She looked at me, her lips moving without a sound. My father-in-law, in his wheelchair, tried to get closer to see and then started to moan, drool running down his chin. Before they could recover, I turned on the television. The video of Milagros, secretly in the study, stuffing the artifacts into a bag and haggling with the trafficker at the back door, appeared on the large screen. Her voice echoed in the silence. "Sell it quickly to send the money to Mateo. To hell with his wife." It was like a slap in the face. Milagros dropped the photos, trembling violently. She looked at me, her eyes shifting from horror to anger and then to pleading. "Amelia? You knew everything? You've been spying on me? I only did it out of necessity." I stood up and approached her, whispering in her ear. "Necessity? So much necessity that you'd sell your father-in-law's memories, your own honor, to support your swindler son and his mistress? So much necessity that you'd put poison in my infusion every night so I couldn't have children?" At the mention of the infusion, Milagros collapsed to the floor in terror. "You know about that too?" "It wasn't my fault. It was Mateo. He convinced me." I burst out laughing, a bitter laugh that echoed through the empty house. "Yes, your precious son deceived me, the insurance company, everyone. He's living like a king, and I'm here working like a mule to pay his debts. What did you think I was? A puppet?" I looked at the two trembling old people, feeling no compassion. They had killed my loyalty. I have sent all this evidence to the police and my lawyers. Tomorrow, when your son sets foot in this house, it won't be as a savior hero, but as a wanted criminal." Hearing this, Milagros's eyes rolled back. She foamed at the mouth and fainted. My father-in-law cried desperately, snot and tears running down his face, but I didn't care. I didn't call a doctor or help her up. The next morning, before the sun had dispelled the fog, I was at their bedroom door. A taxi was waiting outside. I gave them no time to prepare or plead. Milagros, upon waking, looked 10 years older. Seeing me, she knelt and hugged my legs. "Amelia, please, forgive me. Forgive Mateo. After all, you were husband and wife for 10 years. I pushed her hands away as if touching something dirty. "Don't talk to me about affection. You sold that long ago. Now, please, get out of my house. This house is my property. I have no obligation to support those who conspired to destroy me." "Leave the house?" Milagros stammered. "But where will we go?" "I sold the house in the village." "That's your problem," I interrupted. "You sold it to send the money to your son. Well, now let him take you in Switzerland." I threw a piece of paper with the address of the nearest police station at her. "Or you can go here and turn yourselves in. In prison, at least you'll have food and a roof." My father-in-law was crying in his wheelchair. Maybe he was sorry, but it was too late. I signaled to the security guards I had hired. They took their suitcases and escorted them to the door. Milagros's screams echoed down the street. "Neighbors! My daughter-in-law is throwing her in-laws out on the street. Ungrateful, wicked." The neighbors peeked out, but no one intervened. They had seen me taking care of them alone for years. I watched them drive away in the taxi. The house in the village, their last refuge, they had sold for greed. Now they were truly homeless. When the iron gate closed, silence fell over the villa. I felt an immense emptiness, but also a great relief. I had removed the tumor that was consuming me. Painful, yes, but necessary to continue living. "I'm done with you too," I told myself. "Now it's just you left, Mateo." The flight from Zurich landed at Las Americas in Santo Domingo at noon. I didn't go to meet him, but through the tracker a detective had installed on his phone, I knew he had arrived. He didn't come alone. He was accompanied by a foreign lawyer and 2 burly bodyguards, with the air of a powerful millionaire returning home. I waited in the living room. I had prepared a pot of exquisite tea, Matteo's favorite. The aroma filled the room but did not ease the tension. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Matteo to the Guardian of Memory number. "I am in the country. Where is the transaction? I want to see it now," I replied slowly. "Welcome back. The transaction will take place at 18 Calle de la Quietude in the Old Town. I await you. Calle de la Quietude 18. The address of this very house. The house where he had lived, where he had deceived me, and from which he had fled." I imagined his surprise upon reading the address. He would think it was a strange coincidence, or that the mysterious seller had bought his old house. With his arrogance, he would surely lean towards the second option. He would laugh, thinking that fate was smiling on him, that returning to his old house to close the biggest deal of his life was a sign of his absolute victory. He would never believe that his naive wife was behind it all. Through the security camera, I saw a black Mercedes arrive. Matteo got out, impeccably dressed in a designer suit, looked at the house with disdain, and then rang the bell. I stood up, adjusting my blue silk dress, the color of the sunstone vessel, the color of the sky after a storm. I went to open the door, not to receive a husband, but an enemy entering the final trap. The heavy wooden door swung open. Matteo was there. His smile vanished when he saw me, Amelia, and not an unknown old woman. His eyes widened as if he were seeing a ghost. I smiled. A soft but lethal smile. "Hello, Matteo. It's been a long time." For a moment, I saw panic in his eyes, but his survivor's instinct quickly brought back a false calm. He motioned for his companions to stay back, whispering that it was a family matter he would handle himself. He still thought it was a coincidence, or that I was clinging to the house to make him feel sorry for me. The gate closed, trapping him in the cage I had built. He entered the courtyard, his expensive leather shoes echoing on the tiled floor. He looked around with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. "You're still here?" he asked, his voice cold, as if speaking to a servant. "I thought my mother had sold this house. Or are you trying some trick to keep what little is left?" I didn't answer, simply invited him in with a solemn gesture. "Come in, please. Let's not talk in the courtyard. The tea is ready, the flowers are in place. Only you were missing." Matteo frowned. My calm unsettled him. He entered the living room. His eyes fell on the white roses, the open bottle of Vega Sicilia. A mocking smile played on his lips. What a nice touch. White roses, expensive wine. "Are you trying to win me back with these cheap tricks, or do you want to beg me for money?" He sat in the main armchair with an air of superiority. To him, I was still the same submissive, provincial woman. He didn't know that the woman before him had been forged in the fire of betrayal, sharper than any knife. "Look, Amelia," he said, drumming his fingers on the table. "I don't have time for your drama. I've come to see the new owner of this house for an important deal. Be a good girl and disappear. Don't make me call security to have you thrown out." I looked at him, feeling a mixture of pity and disgust. The man I had loved more than my own life was now treating me like trash. He didn't ask about his parents or how I had survived these 3 years. He only thought about money and appearances. I sat across from him, my back straight. I looked him in the eye, my gaze firm. "You wanted to meet the owner of this house? You wanted to meet the seller of the legendary sunstone vessel? You're looking at her." My declaration fell into the silence. But Matteo only responded with a loud laugh, as if he had heard the joke of the century. "You? The seller?" he said, wiping a tear of laughter. "Amelia, you've lost your mind. A woman like you, who had to ask my mother for money just for groceries, is going to own a national treasure? Who are you trying to fool?" He leaned forward. "I see. You heard I was coming to buy artifacts and you want to get some money. How much do you want? 5 million pesos? 10 million? Take it as an allowance for taking care of my parents. Take it and get lost." I remained impassive. When he finished laughing, I spoke, my voice calm but with an authority that wiped his smile away. "Are you finished? Good. Now let me tell you a truth. This house, this land, and even your life are in my hands." I took a stack of documents from a drawer and threw them on the table. They were the deeds to the house in my name and a copy of the vessel's dating certificate I had sent him. Matteo picked them up, his face paling by the second. He looked up, his confidence beginning to waver. "How do you have this?" The mysterious seller. "It was you?" "Yes, it was me," I replied, my voice icy. "I was the one corresponding with you, the one who taught you to distinguish the sunstone vessel, and the one who has what you desire most. Did you think it was a coincidence?" He leaned back in the chair, breathing heavily. Fear was beginning to take hold, but greed was still stronger. "Well, if you're the seller, it's better to keep it in the family. Give me the piece, and I'll pay you. Consider yourself lucky." He still didn't realize he was on the edge of the abyss. He still thought money could solve everything. I pitied his ignorance. "Pay with hard cash," I repeated with a bitter smile. "Are you planning to pay me with the money you got from selling my father's artifacts at a loss, or with the money you swindled from the insurance with your own fake death?" My question was like a bucket of cold water. Matteo started. What are you saying? You know?" "I know everything," I interrupted, my gaze sharp. "I know you live in Australia with Yaritza, that you have a 3-year-old son, and that you convinced your mother to sell the family home. Did you think you could fool me? You were wrong, Matteo. I haven't spent these 3 years crying. The air in the room was unbreathable." Matteo stared at me, sweat beading on his forehead. He realized I was no longer the lamb he could manipulate at will, but a wolf baring its teeth. He tried to regain control, switching to a soft, conciliatory tone. "Amelia, darling, this is a misunderstanding. I know you're angry, but I had my reasons. I did it all to build a future, to give you and my parents a better life. Look, I'm a successful man now, and I've come back for you. The thing with Yaritza was a mistake. I'll fix it. Give me the vessel. I'll sell it for a fortune, and we'll have a lot of money. I'll give you whatever you want." Watching him act turned my stomach. Did he really think I was stupid enough to forgive his crimes for money and affection? I didn't answer. I simply poured him a cup of tea, the same tea I had prepared before his fateful flight. "Drink. It's your favorite, remember?" He hesitated, fearing I had poisoned it, as his mother had done to me. "What's wrong? Are you scared?" I smiled disdainfully, drinking from my own cup. "Relax. I'm not as vile as your family. I want you to live to see the price of your actions." I set the cup down and looked him in the eye. "Matteo, one last question. In these 3 years, while you were with your mistress and your son spending my money, did you ever, even for a moment, feel remorse or pity for me?" Matteo averted his gaze, then looked at me with infinite cruelty. His charade was over. "Remorse?" he scoffed. "How naive you are, Amelia. In business and in love, the smart survive, and the foolish perish. You were submissive and stupid, so you had to suffer. It's the law of life. I owe you nothing. Love is the cheapest thing there is. Only money and power are eternal." His answer was the final knife that severed the last thread connecting me to him. I no longer felt pain, only an absolute emptiness and contempt. I nodded and smiled, a smile of liberation. "Well said. Thank you for showing me your true face. Then, today we settle the score. You want the vessel? All right, I'll give it to you." I stood up and went to the display case, where I kept an elegant red brocade box. Matteo followed me with his eyes, his gaze shining with greed. He had forgotten all caution. He only saw the prize, not the scythe hanging over him. I placed the box on the table. Matteo lunged and opened it with trembling hands. The dazzling sunstone vessel appeared. He picked it up, caressed it, murmuring praise. In his eyes, there was only the obsession of an addict and the calculation of a merchant. "It's perfect. Here is the crescent moon," he whispered, absorbed in his fantasy of victory. He turned to me, triumphant. "All right, name your price. I have the money ready. When I sell it, I'll give you a good sum to retire on." "As payment for taking care of the house." I said nothing. I took out my phone and placed it on the table, screen facing him. Before we talk about money, I think you should take this call. It's more important than that vessel. Just then, Matteo's luxurious phone began to ring. It was a call from Europe, from his main contact in the black market. He answered, putting it on speaker to impress me. "Hello, Mr. Smith. I'm in." Before he could finish, a furious and terrified voice yelled in English from the other side. "Matteo, you damn swindler, you've deceived me. All the merchandise you sold me, the chicken cup, the vase, everything has been confiscated by Interpol and the police. They say it's stolen property with an international warrant." Matteo's face fell. "What? What are you talking about? My merchandise was a family inheritance with papers." "Inheritance? My ass. They have proof it was stolen from the Fan family in the Dominican Republic. I've been arrested. My accounts are frozen. And you know what? I've ratted you out. Your accounts in Switzerland have just been blocked by an international court order. You're finished, you son of a..." The call cut off. Matteo's phone fell to the floor and shattered. He was paralyzed, his face drained of blood, his gaze lost, accounts blocked, merchandise confiscated. He muttered like an automaton. All his money, everything he had risked, had vanished. He was not only ruined but had a huge debt and an international arrest warrant. I stood up, crossing my arms. "What's wrong? Good news from your partner? Has your money disappeared?" Matteo turned to me, the fear in his eyes turning into blind rage. He pointed at me, screaming, "It was you! You tipped off the police! You set me up!" "Yes, it was me," I replied, my voice firm. "I sent all the ownership documents to Interpol months ago. I waited for you to sell everything so you would commit the crimes of receiving stolen goods and money laundering. Did you think I was going to let you sell my father's sweat and tears?" Matteo staggered and fell into a chair. He looked at the vessel in his hands, his last hope. He clutched it like a life raft in a sea of fire. "I still have this. It's authentic. I'll sell it. I'll start over." I looked at him with pity, a ruined gambler clinging to a fake lottery ticket. "Hold on to it, Matteo. See if it saves you from the handcuffs waiting for you outside." As Matteo sank into panic, the living room door burst open. Several figures in police uniforms entered. In front, Hector, with a thick dossier in his hand, followed by agents from the Economic Crimes Unit and a representative from Interpol. The atmosphere froze. Matteo's two bodyguards raised their hands in surrender. Matteo was petrified in the center of the room. An officer stepped forward and read the warrant in a clear voice. "Matteo Garcia, you are under arrest for the crimes of fraud, money laundering, and illicit trafficking of cultural property at an international level. Anything you say can and will be used against you." The cold, metallic sound of handcuffs closing echoed in the room. Matteo reacted, screaming and struggling like a madman. "No, I'm the victim. It was her. That evil woman set me up. The vessel is fake. She tricked me." He lunged at me with bloodshot eyes, but the officers held him back. I remained seated, sipping my tea. Hector approached. "You are mistaken, Mr. Garcia. We are not arresting you for this fake vessel. This was just the bait. We are arresting you for faking your death 3 years ago to collect a multi-million peso insurance policy, for laundering money through your parents' accounts, and for the long list of artifacts you stole from your wife's family and sold abroad." Hearing this, Matteo collapsed, falling to his knees. He looked at me, pleading. "Amelia, I was wrong. Help me, please. Tell them we are husband and wife." I stood up and walked over to him. The man I had once adored was now a cowardly criminal. I shook my head. "Husband and wife? That relationship died the day you went to Australia with your mistress, the day you left me paying your debts. Today, I am only helping justice to be served." As they took him away, his eyes remained fixed on the vessel on the table, his last, fragile hope. "Don't touch it," he screamed. "It's authentic. I have the certificate. It's mine." I looked at him, and then slowly picked up the vessel. The light reflected off its golden glaze, creating a hypnotic beauty. I turned it in my hands, and then looked Matteo in the eye with a sad smile. "Do you still believe it's authentic, Matteo? You believe in a piece of paper, in your eyes. But you forget that the one who created this illusion was me. "You're lying," Matteo stammered. "Let me show you its true value," I said, and let go of my hands. The beautiful sunstone vessel fell to the tiled floor. Crack. The sharp, heartbreaking sound shattered the silence. The fragments scattered everywhere, revealing the new, untreated ceramic paste beneath the sophisticated layer of aged glaze. Matteo's eyes and mouth opened wide, a choked cry in his throat. He looked at the pieces as if he were seeing his own life shattered. "Why? Why did you break it?" I dusted off my hands. "Because it's fake, just like your personality, your love, the happy family you built abroad. It's all a sham, a shiny layer to hide a rotten core. I used an authentic fragment from my mother. I sacrificed my most sacred memory to create this trap and catch the greedy demon inside you. Do you see now? The thing you risked your life for is nothing more than a handful of worthless clay." Matteo buried his head, trembling. That truth was crueler than any conviction. He lost the money and the battle of wits against the woman he had always underestimated. They took him away, humiliated. The clinking of the handcuffs was the requiem for a wasted life. The trial was held 3 months later and captured the media's attention. I went to court not as a victimized wife, but as the protector of my family's legacy and the key witness. Calmly, I presented every piece of evidence, every deception. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Matteo pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison for fraud, money laundering, and trafficking of artifacts. Yaritza, his mistress, was extradited and sentenced to 15 years in prison as an accomplice. But the most tragic end was that of my in-laws. After being thrown out of the house, with no shelter and shocked by their son's conviction, Raphael suffered another stroke that left him completely paralyzed. Milagros, the woman who had spent her life scheming, found herself with nothing, pushing her husband's wheelchair in a depressing public nursing home on the outskirts of the city. I went to see them one last time. In the damp room, Milagros, aged and gray, was feeding her husband. Seeing me, she tried to ask for money, but upon meeting my icy gaze, she lowered her head, her tears falling into the bowl of porridge. I said nothing, nor did I give them a single peso. I just left an old family photo on the table, from a time when greed had not yet devoured their conscience. That was the cruelest punishment. To live with remorse, remembering a lost past. They sowed the wind, and now reaped the whirlwind. Loneliness, poverty, and illness were their true sentence. I turned and left, leaving behind the sigh of lives ruined by money. A year later, the storm had passed. The old villa was restored and turned into a small private museum called the Soul's Refuge. There, the artifacts I recovered from all over the world with the help of Hector and the authorities are displayed. Each piece behind its glass shines with the serene beauty of time, like resurrected witnesses. One autumn morning, as the golden sun flooded the courtyard, I was walking in the garden, hand in hand with little Daniel. I had adopted him from an orphanage a few months ago, a boy with bright eyes and a sweet smile. Although the after-effects of the infusion prevented me from being a biological mother, I learned that motherhood is born of love and care, not just blood. Daniel stopped in front of the display case where I kept the fragments of the fake vessel as a reminder. He looked at me with his big eyes. "Mama, why do you keep this broken bowl? It's not as pretty as the others." I knelt and stroked his hair. "Son, this bowl, though broken and fake, taught me the most valuable lesson about truth. Sometimes what glitters on the outside isn't gold, and what is authentic, even if cracked, is more valuable than a perfect lie." The boy nodded, though perhaps he didn't fully understand. Then, with the innocence of his age, he asked me something that made my heart ache. "Mama, where is my papa? All my friends have one." I looked at the blue sky where white clouds floated lazily. The image of Matteo, the pain, everything had vanished like smoke. I hugged my son, breathing in his childhood scent, and felt an immense peace. "Your papa, my love, is someone who went far away to pay for his mistakes. But don't be sad, because you have me. You have your grandfather who watches over you from heaven, and you will grow up to be a good and honest man, right?" "Yes, and I'll protect you, Mama," Daniel said with determination before running off to chase butterflies. I stood up, feeling the cool breeze. The past had closed behind the doors of a prison. The future, radiant and full of hope, opened before me like a new dawn. I had walked through the darkness to find my own light. Justice and happiness are not something you ask for, but something you conquer and build with your own hands.